I'm here with Rohit Talwar, who is the CEO of Fast Future. Now, you've got a very interesting story for me about why I and everyone else should actually care about data protection.
Well, data protection and our personal privacy, and making sure that we actually know what's going on with our data. So the story is that back in 2001, I was with my family in Barcelona. We had our bag stolen, which had all our passports in. My passport ended up in the hands of a Brazilian drug dealer, affectionately known as the Penguin, and he could have had a better name. I can't imagine that being a very imposing name in drug circles, but
No, me either.
but anyway, his house was raided in Sao Paulo in 2005. He got away. They found piles of cocaine, piles of money, and my passport with his photograph in it. I was sentenced to prison then in Sao Paulo, and in my absence, but they forgot to tell Interpol because it's a foreign passport and that's the protocol. The first I knew about it was that 2016 they were going through the open files. They discovered that I was still on the run, so they told Interpol. It ended up on the system, and when I arrived in Dubai in September 2016, I was thrown in a cell in the airport and held there for 4 hours, and then transferred to the central police station where I spent the night with 16 new friends. Was held until the next day when I got to talk to the local Interpol people, and that's where the story unfolded. They let me go eventually, mainly because they didn't want to do the paperwork, I think. But they held me overnight and then let me stay in a hotel actually, and then I came back. Same thing happened in LA the following week, but I was only held for 2 hours. Eventually I got my MP involved and he got the Brazilian embassy involved. The federal police attaché there basically fought my case, but it took 3.5 months to get it cleared in the Brazilian courts. And really there's a fascinating story there about when you think something like a passport that's been stolen, when you think that story's finished,
You forget about
it hasn't. And actually to check with the authorities and to make sure that you just have some basic protections in place, like keeping copies of all your passports and all the pages of all your passports, having them on a little memory drive that you take with you, but also having them somewhere in a secure location online so you can access them, so you can prove your story if you ever get into that kind of situation. But I think it also raises the issue of how do we get smarter about the management of that kind of personal data. So you've got governments like Dubai already looking at, or the UAE, looking at, can we put your passport on the blockchain? And I think that might be quite an interesting way going forward. We don't know yet whether blockchain is completely infallible and whether the transactions are truly immutable. But at the moment, the hope is that we should be able to have permanent records that are immutable. And that might work really well in terms of managing our personal data as we travel around the world.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Fast Future, you look at what the future holds. What does the future hold for data protection?
So we're in a world now where everyone's becoming obsessed with artificial intelligence. There's an arms race going on between nations. China's pouring in 429 billion at national, regional, local level in order to get world leadership in AI. And we'll see AI becoming more and more central to everything we do in the home, in our personal lives, in our work lives, and in the management of society. And that means that our data is going to be flowing around more and more of these systems. The systems will get smarter over time. Today they're still pretty rudimentary, but they will get smarter. We'll get closer to human intelligence. So I think within 5 years you'll start to see systems that are as smart as 80% of us 80% of the time. And that will be working in all sorts of areas, whether it's security, whether it's deciding if you can have access to particular medical services, deciding what your benefits should be, deciding if you should have a promotion. So our lives will be governed more and more by this stuff, and we have to be understanding now what these technologies can do. In the past we didn't really care what the technologies were in our phone or in our car or in our washing machine, as long as it did the job, because we weren't really worried that somehow all that data would be pulled together and used to try and influence us for marketing or control us or monitor us from a government perspective. Now we've got things going on where China's social scoring people, Russia was tracking everyone through facial recognition when they arrived in cities for the World Cup. We're moving to a scale where we need to understand more and more about these technologies and what they can do, both in terms of how people might be using our data, but also what it means for us in our lives. It might replace us in a job, it might create new job opportunities. It will certainly drive the priority for all of us to take control of our own learning, to make sure we're understanding the technology, we're understanding how it might impact us, and we're learning new skills to make sure we're still employable. The Finnish government has really, ridden this horse hard. It's created an online tutorial program, available in English as well, that teaches everyone about artificial intelligence because they want the whole nation to understand it. That to me is taking it seriously, and I think we all need to be learning a bit about these technologies and what they can do and how they work and where they might be going, so we understand the possible impacts on our lives and we understand the kind of choices that might be created or taken away from us.
A lot of people are quite scared about what AI means for our future. What can we do about that?
So I think there's a few things. One is learn about it, understand it so you're not having fact-free discussions. Secondly, start to have some agency in your life. Start to say no to companies putting cookies on your systems. Start having your data cleared up clearing up your data exhaust on websites and applications that you no longer use. Start refusing to have people have your data and see what happens. Soon we'll have AI tools that manage our data for us, and we'll be quite rigorous in saying, well, why do you want that data? And ultimately we'll get to a point when you combine AI and blockchain, that I won't need to tell anyone who I am when I'm buying goods and services from them. Even something like an airline. In future, they might just know me as customer 7,666,001. And that in this pot over here is some money that when they issue the ticket, the money will be transferred into their account. But they won't need to know my personal details. So long as they know that the government has authorized me to travel, the rest can be managed by AI and blockchain, so they need never know that. Which means if they have, their weekly getting hacked moment, as some airlines do, it won't make any difference because there's nothing of mine that they can hack. And that customer number is unique to one transaction. So after that, there's nothing that they can hack. And if that person did hack and ended up in my plane seat, well then, it's kind of easy to spot.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else people should be thinking about when it comes to, what the next 5 years could bring?
Well, I think one of the big ones that is kind of seeping in almost unseen is the Internet of Things, putting sensors in everything. Manufacturers are putting sensors into our clothing so they can understand how it's used. We're seeing them going into streetlights. China has 125 million cameras, surveillance cameras, adding another 400 million plus by 2020. We need to understand how this Internet of Things, sensors that are monitoring us, monitoring our every movement, we need to understand what's going on. And it's happening in ways that are kind of unexpected as well. So there's a company called Dermot that makes a mattress called the Smartress, and that has a set of sensors in it. And so the idea is that the sensors will gather information to help you work out what's the best time to go to sleep, what's the best position to lie in, and all those kind of things. But it's connected to your mobile phone. The data's sent to your mobile phone. So they market it, literally their marketing is you can find out if someone's having an affair in your bed while you're out of work. And it's those kind of unexpected consequences of the Internet of Things, of total surveillance, of this blanket of sensors monitoring everything in our lives that citizens really need to wake up to, so they can start to think about, well, how do I switch stuff off? How do I stop using stuff? How do I say no to some of these things? How do I have the right not to be noticed? How do I have the right to be forgotten when someone has collected my data? And particularly with the Internet of Things, we're going to have masses of stuff. Someone was just asking a question now about these doorbells, that video who's coming up. They're also capturing people who are walking past. Now, we have to have legislation that says, unless there's an incident, those systems automatically delete, and I mean completely evaporate, the data that they've gathered. Otherwise, we end up with all sorts of possibilities of people accessing that data for marketing purposes, accessing it for surveillance purposes. So we really have to get our heads around how the Internet of Things is creeping into our lives and creating real surveillance and privacy challenges.
Well, I think that's been really fascinating, and I could talk to you for far longer. If people want to do that, if they want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
The simplest way is to email me, rohit@fastfuture.com.
Fantastic. Well,
Thank
thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
today.
Thank you.